such a turnout for a topic like traceability. I've been doing this for a couple of years now, and I feel like there's those people who hear traceability and just say, why bother? And then there's those who are really enthusiastic about it, but those who are really enthusiastic about it are often in the minority. So I'm happy to hear so many Bings and so many of you joining me for this talk. So the work that I'm presenting today has been done at least to a great part in the Software Center Project 27, which is about requirements engineering for large-scale agile system development. That project is headed by Erik Knaus, and I'm also working with Jennifer Horkoff as another senior in that project. And then we had the great fortune to have three very smart former PhD students in Salome Maro, Rebecca Wohlrab, and Rashida Kasaouli, who supported us in that work. And you will see their names again. So this is not my work alone. This is a real collaborative effort, as befitting the topic. And we're working on different things in Software Center Project 27, but collaborative traceability, which is the topic of today's talk, is one of them, where our goal is to help understand the challenges and especially the challenges that you have in the industry and try to improve the practice. And this is complemented by a second stream, which is about the construction of traceability information models, which we will come to at the end of this talk, which is a slightly different but highly related topic. Obviously, these two are interrelated. So we have this research stream on traceability in large-scale requirements engineering and beyond that. So it's not only focused on requirements. We're trying to cover the entire systems engineering and software engineering lifecycle. And if you're interested in this, there are, of course, always opportunities to join us and to work with us. We have a number of instruments developed that we can use to analyze your situation and even improve your situation, hopefully. And what I want to talk about today is mostly the challenges of collaborative traceability and which practices we have identified to address them. So just a very short primer. I understand that most of you will know what traceability is about, but maybe there's one or two people who are curious and haven't heard of the topic so much. So traceability is the idea that you interrelate uniquely identifiable software engineering artifacts to any other. And of course, in the systems engineering setting, we're not only talking about software engineering artifacts, but mostly that is our focus. And the idea is that these traceability links, as they're called, create a network between the different artifacts that show the interrelations and allow answering questions about the software product and its development process. So a typical thing that you do with traceability links is you do change impact analysis. So which parts of the system do you need to touch when a requirement changes, for instance? The other thing that is very prominent use of traceability links is the creation of safety cases and increasingly also the creation of security assurance cases. So in both cases, you have specialized requirements, either safety requirements or security requirements, and a number of different standards require the organizations to show that these safety or security requirements have been implemented in a certain way and have been validated in a certain way. And having traceability links that connect, for instance, safety requirements to something like failure modes and effect analysis, to certain design decisions, to certain functions that have been implemented, and then to the test cases and simulations and validation results, allows to create a safety case because it allows to derive the evidence directly from the existing development artifacts. And the same is true for security. So upcoming standards for security assurance are basically implementing the same idea. So you need to create a security assurance case that shows that the security requirements, which have been derived from a threat analysis, for instance, have been implemented correctly and have been validated correctly. And obviously, if the relationships between these artifacts are captured explicitly via traceability, then providing such a case is much easier than if you would have to collect this information manually. The figure on the slide shows a very simple traceability information model, which is used to tell the engineers how the different artifacts are related to each other and what this relationship means. So a requirement, for instance, can be tested by a system test, realized by a design model, and in turn a design model is implemented by an implementation. Of course, real traceability information models are much more complex and are actually not only traceability information models, but we will come to that a little later. So that's traceability in a nutshell. However, I think it's clear to everybody that if you are serious about traceability, this is not something that a single person can do. Even though in our research we have seen situations in which companies actually employed a person whose full-time job it was to maintain a traceability matrix in an Excel file, this is rare, fortunately. So in most cases, traceability is really seen as a collaborative effort where different roles need to interact with each other to create these traceability links, to maintain them, and later to use them. So yeah, we see traceability across roles. We also see traceability across teams because in many cases, these different roles are not part of the same team, but are distributed across teams or even across different parts of the organization. We also see collaboration between OEM and suppliers, for instance, which is very tricky, especially in regard with exchanging traceability information. And then on a technical level, traceability requires collaboration across tools, right? So you have your requirements in something like doors, and you have your design models in something like Enterprise Architect, and then the function development happens in MATLAB, and you need to be able to trace across these tools. Obviously, this becomes even more problematic or challenging or interesting when we're talking about distributed teams, as we have in most real-world settings these days. And of course, we need to consider that none of these things are static. So the software artifacts change constantly. The trace links need to undergo constant change to keep up with that, but also the organizational structure changes constantly. So the product owner that is assigned to a certain capability team might leave and move around, and then somebody else needs to move in, or the teams are restructured, the features and capabilities are structured differently, and that means that the people that are involved in this are also changing. So we have these situations where we have multiple stakeholders with different backgrounds involved in a situation where change is the only constant. And this is something that traceability needs to take care of. And the only way to do this is to treat it as a collaborative effort where everybody in the organization takes part in the creation and maintenance of these trace links and keeping them up to date. Now, one of our earlier works on this was actually work conducted by Rebecca as part of her master thesis, where she spoke to more than 20 people in 15 different organizations about which challenges they see for collaborative traceability in their organizations. And we came up with these challenges here on this slide, categorized in 3 different categories. So the collaboration across boundaries is something that I already mentioned. We have different departments. We need to organize or collaborate across organizational boundaries as well, and of course across tool boundaries too. However, this also, traceability in these circumstances also affords us some opportunities. So trace links can carry additional meaning and additional insight about a system, which makes it easier to communicate in a distributed environment. It might, for instance, be possible that a trace link gives an engineer information about who is responsible for an artifact which is being traced, or why these things are related to each other. And we've also seen that in some organizations, there is an opportunity to use traceability to connect more than software engineering artifacts in order to ensure that engineering is interdisciplinary, which means that people from electrical architectures or even from the hardware side can partake in the artifacts that are created on the software side. And there's a really cross-cutting view of the entire system. That is an opportunity not necessarily always realized, but our respondents, our interviews had identified this back then. Then when it comes to common goals and responsibilities, one of the challenges is that the people on the ground that actually need to create and maintain these trace links are not necessarily those that benefit from them. And that is, of course, a motivational issue. So if you are supposed to invest a lot of time in something that you're not really benefiting from yourself, then you might be reluctant to do it. It's also a quality issue in the end, because this also means that the quality of the trace links can suffer, that trace links go unmaintained, that only few trace links are created, and so on. That also has to do with the management of responsibility. So who is it who should actually create and maintain these links? When should this happen in the development process? Who is accountable for the creation of them or the non-creation of them? As an opportunity, if these common goals and responsibilities exist, there is a chance that trace links can help make the decisions that have taken place within the system explicit. So that can either be via trace links to specific design decision artifacts, or it can be via metadata that is stored with the traceability links. And of course, also by being able to trace to who made which decision when. And this is also, again, something that is not necessarily always realized, but which our respondents saw as a chance. And then finally, when it comes to collectively maintaining the trace links, the link quality and maintaining the link quality is extremely difficult. First of all, because it's extremely hard to measure trace link quality. Our current hypothesis is that trace link quality depends extremely on what you want to do with the trace links, and that changes from situation to situation. It's also very hard to determine automatically. It's a highly labor-intensive manual process, and therefore there needs to be an infrastructure in place that makes it easy and ensures that the trace link quality is high. Another challenge is that propagating changes and notifying stakeholders about changes in the traced artifacts is a technical issue, mostly because of the different tool boundaries. So it's not always clear when trace links need to be updated and how to know about this. But as mentioned before, if trace links exist, then they can be a way to retrieve information about the artifacts and about the people responsible for it and why it has been created. So we see that there are challenges, but there's also some opportunities. And one of the goals that we have set for ourselves is, of course, to make sure that we manage the challenges and that we realize the opportunities. And one of the things that we did at the end of 2019 is we had a workshop together with our esteemed colleague Jane Cleland Huang from the University of Notre Dame in the US, where we had a dozen or so practitioners in a room, and we discussed how collaborative traceability can be realized. Back then, we came up with a list of a total of 14 different practices that can be helpful in achieving collaborative traceability and addressing these challenges, and we later boiled this down to 9 of them. So we have a cross-organizational traceability information model, which means that the entire organization shares the same view of the information that exists. We have implicit traceability, where trace links are created in a really simple and non-intrusive way. Upfront traceability, where somebody puts in effort to create trace links in the beginning, which can then be maintained and updated, and so on and so forth. I have some background noises. Maybe can you check if your microphones are muted? Thank you. So these practices were defined in this workshop, and while this was very interesting and very insightful, it was not 100% clear to us, first of all, why these practices were not already used in practice in the organizations. Well, we had some ideas, but no empirically validated ideas. What the expected benefits would be, and what the hindrances would be. So we tried to validate this, or we started to validate this by creating a survey about these different practices and how they are being perceived, and have collected some initial data. I will later give you the chance to participate in that survey as well if you want to. We're always happy to get more data, and maybe one of my colleagues will post the link, which is on the last slide of the slide deck, in the chat later on for you to partake. And I want to talk about 3 of the different practices today, just for time reasons. And see what you think about it. I have some interactivity built into this. So let's start by the cross-organizational TIM. So as I said before, the idea is that the entire organization has the same view on what the information in the organization is and how it is managed. And this addresses a whole bunch of different challenges and opportunities. So the idea, again, being that an information model for everybody, for all the teams, that captures all of the information, helps the different teams to understand which information is relevant for them, how they need to interact with the information that is created in other teams and in other departments and in other organizations, why the links are created, what quality aspects they have, and so on and so forth. So now I'm trying an experiment with you. This is an interactive slide. So please open your browser, go to menti.com. There you will find a box where you need to enter a code. That code is 33561752. And once you have entered that code, you will be able to answer or to give your perspective on the following 3 statements. So cross-organizational TIM. This practice is commonly used in my organization, and you can notes from strongly disagree to strongly agree. This practice brings or would bring sufficient benefit to justify the effort of use, and introducing this practice required or would require significant effort for my organization. So please open your browser, go to menti.com, enter the code, and answer these 3 statements, or rate these 3 statements, please. I'll give you a minute to do this. And I would be very happy if you would let me know in the chat if you've already done this. This slide should update automatically, but I'm not seeing it yet. Nope. There's also a chance that this will just go wrong, so bear with me.
There's a couple of people done in the chat.
Right, so now we need to figure out why the slide doesn't update. Oh, reload, maybe that's it. No, no. This is unfortunate. So in my preview, I don't see, no.
It's a little hesitant, but we could see it change.
Yeah, there were 18 people now in the.
18.
No, there we go. Oh, excellent. Okay, great. Thanks for bearing with me here. So this practice is commonly used in my organization. Well, we're sort of landing in the middle here. Some seem to be using it. Well, we don't have a lot of strongly agrees, but most aren't. There seems to be some agreement that this would be valuable. And there's also some agreement that this would require significant effort. And of course, this is a typical thing that we see quite often, right? So the benefit is being visible, but it's also clear that this is very hard to do. and especially implementing a cross-organizational team. There are some companies in our Software Center project who have done this or are trying this at the moment, and they see the issues with that because it's such a huge effort to do this across the organization and to capture all the information the right way. If you have any comments about this, feel free to leave it in the chat. Be happy to discuss this a little bit more later, but looking at the time, I also need to move on. So thanks for joining us in this. You'll have the chance twice more because the next practice that I want to talk about are traceability dashboards. So the idea of a traceability dashboard is that the information about the trace links and the quality of the trace links and how the trace links are being used is being made accessible in a graphical format and in an easily digestible format. You know, think of in the team room, there's a big screen that shows the build status, and right next to it is another screen that shows the quality of the trace links at the moment and some key metrics about it. And that would be helpful in order to make it easier for the developers to see what benefits they have from traceability, that it is actually useful. It might also help in improving the trace link quality because that makes it a little bit more measurable at least, and therefore also helps realize the opportunities of collaborative traceability. So here again, I'm asking you, there's another Menti slide where you can fill in how you see traceability dashboards. Is this practice commonly used in your organization? Would this bring benefits which would justify the effort? And would this require significant effort in your organization? The code is the same. You should just be able to go to the next slide on menti.com and fill this in. All right, let me try and reloading this. Ah, great. Oh, not a lot of usage. That's not surprising. So we've been in touch with some companies who do a little bit of that, but not in a full-fledged way. Benefit is not quite as clear in this case, but the effort is also a little bit less maybe than introducing a cross-organizational team. So it would be interesting to know, for instance, why this would be require a significant effort for your organization. So if you have any comments about that, be happy to leave that in the chat, and then we can talk about it later once the recording stops as well. Thank you again. Right, the last one that I just want to mention very briefly is implicit traceability, and there the idea is that instead of creating this very, cumbersome database of traceability links with a big traceability information model and all of this, you rely on a more implicit way of defining the relationship. So, for instance, the most typical thing is when you have a commit message and you reference a bug ID in the commit message. That would be an implicit traceability link. If your test case has a little documentation snippet on top that references the requirement that is being tested by ID. This is implicit traceability. It's very often the kind of traceability that is being used in open source projects, and we've also seen this quite widely used in the industry. The advantage is that it's incredibly quick to do. It requires very little cognitive effort. The disadvantage is that it's much harder to get the data together and collect the data to make more advanced things like change impact analysis based on this. So again, you have the chance to leave your estimation how commonly this is used in your organization, if this would bring benefits that justify the effort of use, and whether or not introducing this would require significant effort for your organization. Helena, in the meantime, how much more time do I have?
So we typically run to 12:30, which is 1 additional minute.
Excellent.
But what we can, of course, do is if people need to leave, you just leave the meeting, and then we can open up for 1 or 2 questions in the end for those who can stay on.
Great. I'll try and see that I get to the end here. Okay, very interesting. So benefit is relatively high, effort is relatively low, but it's also more used than the other ones, and that's not surprising, right? So this is not uncommon in agile teams. They reference their bug tracker in their commit messages and so on. So very interesting. I would be interested in those in looking at the people that said that it's a lot of effort to implement that in an organization. So if you have any comments, feel free to leave them. Okay, so in my last 1 to 2 minutes, I just wanted to go into the cross-organizational TIM a little bit deeper, which is one of the topics that we're also dealing with, how you construct a traceability information model. And having such a cross-organizational TIM can be extremely advantageous because it establishes a shared standard across the organization and addresses the different stakeholders that you have in an organization and also the different views that these stakeholders have on the organization. That also makes it extremely complicated to build up, and maybe exacerbating this is that in many cases that we've seen with our project partners, that the traceability information model is sort of a derivative of a more general information model that not only captures artifacts, but also, for instance, processes and roles and so on. We did a deeper study on this last year where we talked with a lot of the project companies about how they see on this, and one of the issues that makes it so hard to develop TIMs is that the products that are being created are very long lasting. So there needs to be a strategy to evolve the TIM over time. Another thing is that the product is so complex and we're often dealing with product lines. So there also needs to be a way to differentiate between platform and product links in the TIM. And finally, the sheer size of the companies that we're dealing with that have mixed development processes and workflows makes this very hard to deal with. Now, we've also worked a little bit on the ideas on how to address this, and one way that we think we can address at least some of the challenges is to treat the traceability information model as a boundary object, which means as an object that is shared between different teams and that requires explicit governance and explicit responsibilities and usage rules. And we have developed a framework with which to analyze these boundary objects and believe that treating a TIM as a boundary object and identifying the concrete governance rules for such a TIM make it easier to integrate the different stakeholders and the different viewpoints. We have also started to work on guidelines for how to develop traceability information models, and part of that is to identify critical design decisions in developing a TIM. For instance, which artifacts should be covered, what the granularity of the trace links should be, how to support this by tooling, as well as defining clear and objective criteria to evaluating these design alternatives that you have. And this is a work that is currently under submission. We hope to know in about 3 weeks whether it was accepted or not. But the idea is that in the future, we want to move further towards clear guidelines on how to create a successful and usable and evolvable traceability information model for an organization. So where do we go from here? Well, as I said before, we want to build a better understanding of how these practices are applicable. So why is it so hard to introduce them? Why is it not yet in place? Why do you believe this can help the teams, and how would you make it happen? So if you have some insights into that, we can discuss it now, but we can also have a more intimate meeting to talk about that. And then, of course, we want to address these individual challenges, for instance, by developing guidelines for the development of TIMs in large organization, to identify metrics and key performance indicators that we can use in traceability dashboards, for instance. And for all of this, I would be very happy if you had the time this afternoon or sometime in the next week or so to help us gather more data. So I've left the link here. I hope somebody posts it in the chat as well, which you can use to go into the into our survey, where we have these 9 different collaborative traceability practices that I mentioned earlier, and where you can help us understand a little bit better how this works for you or doesn't work for you and what you feel is valuable or not. And with that, I just want to very quickly show the acknowledgements so that this ends up in the YouTube video. And now I am done. Thank you for your attention. Sorry for taking a little bit longer than expected. And I'm very happy to discuss this with you now. Thanks.